Hello, everyone. This is episode 4 of As Above, So Beloved. We have with us Noble Intent, or Rick, if you prefer, since he shows his beautiful mug there and also his name and also his chart, as we can see at this moment. How you doing, Rick?
Fantastic, brother. Greetings and salutations from Mexico. Now you know where I live
Oh,
too.
yeah. They know. I already knew.
You already knew, of course.
Yeah. Greetings from Portugal. Everything good here and over there as well, I hope. So the last episode we had two questions from commenter that we will address just before we go to today's subject, which are signs. So we'll start with Aries. But before you mentioned something about Pluto making an aspect to your natal chart, or if it was the natal chart. Maybe it was something to another planet. It's something that you need to listen back to. But nonetheless, that Pluto made an aspect and it affected your life. So it changed your life, basically. Do you have any insights on that? And then also, a complementary question to this is since the outer planets are slow moving, the aspects that they do to each other will affect for a long time. So would you like to please answer that comment?
Yeah. So, Hellenistic astrology focuses on the traditional planets, as we've mentioned in previous episodes, and they were working with what they could see at the time. That said, most Hellenistic astrologers worth their salt most certainly pay minders to the outer planets because they just when they speak with a bullhorn. They're quite loud, and because they're the outer planets, they move slowly through our chart. As we mentioned last time, Uranus stays in a sign roughly 7 years. Neptune, roughly 14 years. Pluto, roughly 20 years. And so as they transit through the sky and therefore through the zodiac and then our respective natal charts, they cast quite a shadow.
Hmm.
Generally, is it fair to say shadow, right? I think so. Oftentimes it seems these outer planets stir the shadows within. And so, yes, indeed, when we look at the outer planets and within the context of the natal chart, it gives us a set of information. Like, for example, we spoke to at length you having the outer planet of Pluto over here in your first
Hmm.
house and the first sign in your first house. And therefore, in that particular case, that is going to reflect in your personality, how you present yourself, Plutonian characteristics. There's going to be an intensity as we spoke to. Now, as we open up the 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 real-time clock, I like to say, or the planets as they are making their transits in the sky currently, um, we can go and we can we can pull up uh your outer chart here and we can
Hmm.
take a look and find Pluto and we can see that it's at 11 degrees of uh
Sagittarius, my third.
Sagittarius in the third, yeah. And then we say, okay, well, right now, currently, Pluto is making trine aspects to your seventh house and your 11th house. We know that. And ultimately, we will get into the nature of transiting
But
that.
I'm sorry to interrupt, Rick, but I think the date you have there is 2000,
Okay.
January 1st, 2000. I think.
Uh-huh. Thank you. Thank you for pulling that off. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah,
so
man.
Pluto is now in Aquarius. Yeah.
You have you have any desire to go back to 2000? I don't.
Not at all. No, not at all. It wasn't a it wasn't a cool time, I must say. But yeah, so the aspect right now is a trine. Let's pick up on that. So or near a trine.
Well,
Could you yeah.
Yeah, well, yes, if you're referring back to your first house, then yes.
Yeah.
If you will
Hmm.
see here that Pluto is in the fifth house, and it's making a 120-degree aspect. It's so we're going to look at aspects in a couple of different ways. We're gonna have an aspect by sign or an aspect
Hmm.
by degree. And right now, Pluto happens to be in your fifth house, and the fifth is in a natural trine to the first. And so, in addition to the impact that Pluto is making on your fifth house, in way of what we call a conjunction, it's also making trines to your first house and your ninth house. It's making sextiles
Hmm.
to your seventh house and your third house, and then it's making squares, right, to your second house,
Hmm.
to your eighth house, right? And so we'll get
Yeah.
in again, we'll get into this in a little bit more detail, but the outer planets, because they spend such a significant amount of time um, in uh, in a house, yeah, there is as you would expect, if we think about the nature of the movement of something that's going to so for example, let's just take Pluto, 240
Hmm.
years it takes to go around the sun, right?
Hmm.
So 20 years in a particular sign, it's slow and laborious. It makes retrogrades, it goes forward and then it stops, stations, it goes backwards, then it goes back direct and so on. And so, yes, it makes significant change in one's life, but as we recall, the outer planets are generally called transpersonal planets. And not only do
Hmm.
they affect the native or the individual, they affect the populace. They affect cultures, the collective, we like to say.
Mm. Very well. Very well. So they do take a long time, and so therefore any aspect will be there, present, working in the background for a long time. So that is the main thing. Of course, you probably don't recall what was the aspect that the commenter was referring to, but nonetheless, Pluto has this transformative energy, as we've talked previously. And as I myself am of the opinion, and correct me if that is not your opinion, it can only and will only transform that which isn't holding up as true. And therefore, often you mention the importance of its placement in relation to Saturn, because Saturn would be the one that determines if things hold up or not, right? So maybe it was an aspect with Saturn that changed your life back then that you were referring to, and that threw away things that weren't truly you, that weren't belonging to your individuality, no?
Yeah, I liken it to, as you pointed out, I think we were using the metaphor of Saturn being the headmaster or the drill
Yeah.
sergeant or the boss. Yeah. And then it enlists the services of its henchmen, Pluto and Mars, to do its bidding. And ultimately, I think we spoke to Saturn getting a bit of a bad rap. Saturn wants us on track and on course, heading down the path of the heart or our dharma, our purpose in this incarnation. And as we stray, and I did stray, like most of us in life, at some point we stray off our um, the path, so to speak, and we sometimes we make perpendicular moves away from the path. And when that happens, when Saturn comes and makes aspects to certain parts of our chart, and or Pluto, for example, in this case, it's going to course correct it and so there's no doubt that um, there was some outer planet transits that impacted my life. At the time, it was catastrophic, and it
Mm.
feels like this. However, in retrospect, it's exactly what was needed. And there was a course correction. I can see that now in hindsight, and I'm very grateful for the Plutonian energy coming to town. Pluto happens to be, and I may have mentioned this, Pluto happens to be in my sixth house of health, daily routine and service to others. And that's in making an aspect to Mars in my north node of destiny. And so when you've got the powerhouse of Pluto, um, charging, if you will, essentially my destined course. Um,
Hmm.
Combined with Mars, you've got the two henchmen here, making sure that I'm doing what I should be doing, in this case, day to day, to keep my health up, ultimately, so I can be of service to others. So,
Right.
yeah.
Right. Okay, so another question just briefly was about a triangle. So in this case, of course, a trine that you had been mentioning, apparently in the hub. Um, that was Uranus, that when it goes to Gemini, it will form a trine with Pluto in Aquarius and Neptune in Aries, if this is correct. So can you address this a little bit?
Yeah, let
Oh,
me just,
Neptune and Uranus would be sextile, yes, instead of trine. But yeah.
yeah, let me just draw a couple things here so anybody who's watching can take a look. Mhm.
And this is forward to July, July 15, we see there.
Yeah, yeah. So I moved this to July 15th because this is we were speaking to the outer planets. And so
Mhm.
we're on topic here. And of course there was a question. So I thought, knowing that this is forthcoming, I thought it would be a good idea for us to kick the clock up a few months from now so that we can see this configuration that's making itself present. So uh, Uranus is transiting into Gemini. Again, Uranus is going to be in Gemini for 7 years. In your particular case, what does this mean? Uranus is going and it's going to be lighting up or activating the ninth house of the higher mind. Gemini adds um, further depth to that idea. A Gemini is of the mind, right? It speaks to
Mhm.
the mental, the intellect, the way that we communicate. And so combine that with the ninth house being one's philosophy, cosmology, theology, this type of thing. What's happening is you got, well, you can't see it now because let's show the viewers here. In addition to Uranus coming through about this time, Mars is also in your ninth house, Armin.
Mhm.
And so you're kind of getting supercharged here, um, in more ways than one. And so that transit in and of itself, Uranus coming into the ninth house, and spending 7 years in there, that suggests that you are going to be liberated from old ideas. It's going to have a Uranus, Uranian flavor, to your ninth house. And what we remember, Uranus is it liberates. It's frees us from that which binds. And oftentimes human beings get bound to their old ideas. And so
Right.
now couple this with, back to the question here, couple this with the fact that Uranus is making an aspect by sign and by degree. So you can see here it's at 4 degrees.
Mhm.
Neptune is also at 4 degrees in the seventh house of the other. Um, in your case, that happens to be in Aries. So it's making a sextile right here. And then Pluto is making a sextile to, from Pluto at 4 degrees, is making a sextile to Neptune at 4 degrees. And then Pluto is making a trine to Uranus. So this is quite a configuration. You called it a triangle. That's good enough. We call it a trine. But this trine or triangle is really quite potent. And for everybody, not just you, and because we're taking a look at the what's happening in the real-time sky, is these outer potent slow moving planets are in beautiful aspects to one another, or they will be as we move into the summer. And so, sextiles, trines, in comparison to, say, oppositions and squares, generally are supportive. They
Mhm.
generally aid us. Well, again, back to your point a few minutes ago, all of the aspects are supportive in the long run. What I meant by that is we tend to receive them as supportive in the real time, right? Whereas
They're more comfortable. They're more comfortable.
they're much more comfortable.
Yeah.
Let me
Mhm.
bring your attention to something that sweetens this time in our lives here by circling Jupiter. Um, Jupiter at even though it says it's at 3 degrees, if we were to go forward a couple more days, Jupiter's also going to be at 4 degrees. So there's and Jupiter, if you recall, is the greater benefic. Um,
Mhm.
the planet tends to expand. And so we've got all of these potent planets making favorable aspects. And so we should carpe diem, yeah, seize the day. And I
Mhm.
think a lot of us who are in the know or trying to become in the know, we are preparing ourselves for this 2026 is quite a year. So
Yeah.
do you think we adequately answered that question?
I think
Or
so. I think so. Of course, we can go back to this when in the future episode about the aspects, because we're going to go deeply into what a trine means, what a sextile means, a square, etc. But I think so. I think it was adequately responded, and so I also encourage any viewers to leave your questions in the comments. They will be seen and addressed, if appropriate, of course, to the discussion. So, Noble, now let's move to the topic of the day, which is the signs. And of course, the first sign would be Aries. Usually, I would say very misunderstood because of its association with the Greek god of war. And I say misunderstood because people treat Aries as violence, aggression, war, conquest, even a certain unmeasurable degree of selfishness. And Aries, in my view, and the way I intuitively read, is merely the action taker, right? The one that initiates action. Often true without thinking. Aries doesn't need much thought to initiate an action, but nonetheless, it is an aspect that is absolutely essential to all life to initiate an action. It may not conclude that action. That may be taken over by someone else or another aspect, another sign. But without those that cross, a threshold or, explore first, nothing would be done, right? Because others are always waiting for the one that takes the first step. Would this be correct to affirm in relationship to Aries?
yeah, Aries does get a bad rap. It is associated with Mars. Mars is its ruler, and Mars generally is associated with war, as you pointed out. And so there is that aspect. However, um, I like to think so. Let's set the table before we get into the weeds here with Aries. Let's set the table and remind our audience here that we're using a Hellenistic whole sign approach. And the whole sign means one sign, one house. Um, Another confusion that takes place is oftentimes we too closely associate Aries in this particular case with the first house. Now, it's important to recognize that Aries does share some themes with the first house themes. And in fact, there's quite a bit of overlap, but it's not exactly one to one. And so it's important to recognize that. And so you rightfully said that the beginning is Aries. It is the beginning of the solar year. It represents the springtime in North America. this is in the springtime, of course, is when we prepare to and plant our crops, right? As the sun emerges out of its winter months and becomes more potent and available, it basically helps through the process of the seed germinating and popping out of the soil and this type of thing. So Aries is cardinal fire. What does cardinal mean? Cardinal means initiates, takes action. It can go from a complete stop to 0 to 60, in
Mhm.
3.5 seconds. My youngest daughter has the sun in Aries, and she can do that very thing. She can go from a standstill into action. Aries tends not to bounce their impulse, if you will, to act off their environment or others. They tend to, now this is dependent upon the remainder of their aspects in their chart and whatnot. But
Mhm.
if we were to take Aries as a standalone, um, they just simply don't need to have validation from the other. And so they initiate, they take action, etc. So Aries is obviously therefore a masculine sign. And it's, as we mentioned a few minutes ago, its ruler is Mars. Sun is exalted in Aries, and it's really, I think every good team, every effective team needs Aries energies. And of course, we all have the Aryan energy within us. That said, those who have Aries ascendant or say their sun is in Aries, boy, they tend to be the spark plug that initiates us. So,
Right. Right. And also another thing to mention, because again, still on the theme about Aries being misunderstood, is that one of the most visible things about the world stage narratives is that when Aries is involved, they always involve narrative conflict, be it war or another kind of conflict, but it's always about a competition between two polar opposites, for example, right? And this is a cartoonish way to depict Aries. And exactly because it is cartoonish, it is too simplified, it can't be true. So this is another indication for people that, from one perspective or another, pay attention to the world stage, which I'm not saying not to pay attention. Do pay attention, but pay attention with a certain perspective, not to get sucked in. Is that whenever you will notice that whenever there's an important aspect or whatever, whenever Aries is involved, or Mars, there is always a conflict emerging on the world stage. And this is absolutely cartoonish. If you would see, something much more subtle, like someone initiated action towards someone initiated a new venture or something like that, it wouldn't have the same impact because all these narratives presuppose a cartoonish view, a simplified cartoonish view, in the same way that the pantheon of Greek gods were cartoonish. They were, they were exaggerations exactly to serve as a blueprint for the narratives that would be written around them. And so deviate us from the internal aspects, like you said, everyone has Aries inside their psyche, to the external, right? So I just wanted to make that note.
very important. Very important. Yeah. Aries, there's some catchphrases that are associated with each sign and the little phrase to help people remember its primary characteristic is the I am, right? And so this is yeah, it's narrative, very individualistic. The and this is important, and this is important, and there is a time and there is a place for us to individuate and separate from the
Absolutely.
mass. and to express ourselves uniquely and fully. In your particular case, you have Aries in the seventh house, which is really interesting because the seventh house is the other. So we have the sign of the native, the Aries, the I am, in the house of the other. And so um, there's a number of different ways that this can express itself, and we've spoke to this a little bit before, I think. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and it's so this might suggest, for example, that you either bring a very Aries-esque, fiery cardinal, masculine um, air about you in your relationship with others, or it could mean that you attract that, or some balance between. I know that's a bit vague, but it covers all possibilities. But oftentimes with Aries in the seventh, we can see very clearly either the native really holding that mantle of the Aryan energy and or she can see that in the partner. So,
Mm-hmm.
um,
Mm-hmm.
so yes, as you pointed out, the Aries energy is necessary. Um, I'm quite fond of the the qualities of the Aries. They tend to initiate um, action for themselves or for a group, but they also can initiate simply by their presence. Um, At any rate, any questions or any further thoughts on Aries?
Well, the question here is to give an example to the audience. In the chart we're seeing, which it is my chart, we see Mercury there in Aries in the seventh house and retrograde. We've already addressed what retrograde means, but of course we're going to go deeper into that in the aspects episode further on. But would you, I mean, imagine you're doing a reading here for me right now, and you're addressing the sign of Aries and what I have in Aries, and you're presented with this. So Mercury in the seventh house in Aries retrograde. What would you say as an example for the viewers? This means
Yeah, of
this
course.
translates as yeah.
Yeah, first things first. I would, first things first. What I would do is I would go and look for, and see where Mars is. And
Mhm.
so I, as I'm looking at someone's chart, I would say in this particular case, we happen to be uh, well, it's interesting. It's because I wouldn't necessarily start by looking for Aries. That wouldn't be my starting point. But let's assume for a moment that we've got around and we are speaking to the seventh house topics. We happen to notice that Aries is here, and the first and most important thing that I would do over and above understanding the characteristics of the seventh house, the characteristic of Aries, is I would go and find out where the ruler is, or the god that resides in the temple of Aries, and that is Mars, as we pointed out. And so I would I would say, okay, we got Mars is right next door in the sixth house, and what does that mean? This means that the seventh house is going and of the other is going to be tied to sixth house themes. And the sixth house, we haven't got into the weeds on the houses yet, but happens to be
Mhm.
the day to day, our health and service to others. So there's going to be a flavor there. Let's go for the sake of time here. Let's just go into the planets that are in the seventh house of Aries. And as you
Mhm.
pointed out, you have Mercury there. So what is Mercury? Well, Mercury is the messenger. Mercury is communication. It's the intellect. It's the way in which we process our thoughts, our intellect, this type of thing, and then how we formulate ideas and then bring them forth generally in some form of communication. And so what this suggests, having Mercury Retrograde, as we spoke to in the past, tends to be that to suggest that there's an inner or reflective aspect of Mercury, right? And
Mm,
so
mm,
it might go something like this. If you were to assume the role of the Aryan energy in the Aries energy in the relationship, which would generally suggest that you're assertive, right? That you take initiation on behalf of the other or the partnership, right? And you're not going to be afraid to do that not only with your actions but also with your words, right? Um,
mhm.
in other words, you're going to use words to initiate the partnership to take action, probably, right? And it's
Right.
not going to, whereas the Aries energy tends to, sometimes it's impulsive into where it doesn't consider deep thought, for example. In your case, given the fact that you have Mercury there in retrograde, so reflective, internalized Mercury, it suggests that as you advise the partnership, the relationship to take action, you're going to do that in a more reflective manner as opposed to um, impulsive.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yes, yes, absolutely. And I think it's a good example to show that Aries isn't necessarily, of course, associated with conflict. Of course, step on an Aries toes, and the Aries will make you feel that it's not a good idea. But the conflict isn't associated directly with Aries. Aries is merely the one that initiates an action that probably it might be an action that nobody thought about before, or an action that everybody is thinking about, but nobody has the guts, let's say, to take the first step. In this case, with Mercury, it's associated with the intellect. So it could be, the fact that sometimes I have ideas, right, or present ideas that may be not in aligned necessarily with the status quo, or doesn't go in the breeze that is blowing in the collective. But nonetheless, it might be that later on they manifest as, oh, actually, this was the step that needed to be taken, right? So
Indeed.
yeah.
Yeah, let me just take a moment to reiterate something that we spoke to a little bit yesterday, and then, excuse me, in the last episode. And let me make sure I have this at the right. Oh, there we go. That you just brought up a few minutes ago. You suggested that um, in the narrative, the world theater or the world stage, narratives in theater, that seemingly when Aries is when there's making strong aspects into Aries, war seems to be right around the corner, or in
Mhm.
lockstep with that. Just wanted to bring this to our attention here. I just pulled up that outer chart, which is what's going on in the sky right now. And again, reiterating what we spoke to in the last episode, but I think for those who didn't see that, or interested in current events, uh, Saturn, the headmaster, and its buddy Neptune, just ingressed in February into Aries. Saturn is going to be in Aries for the next uh, 2 years. Neptune's going to be in Aries for the next 14 years. And yes, and that was February the 20th. And so lo and behold, just on the heels of that, uh, you know, for anybody who's alive, you know that there's quite a conflict in the Middle East, right? And then it seems to be it's escalating. And so there's the Aries is hugely ignited currently. I think we would be remiss if I didn't just take us forward a little bit into April and show you what's going on. Actually, I want to show you what's going on. Uh, yeah, let me get rid of this so you can see. So April the
Mhm.
17th, and this is just right around the corner, a couple of weeks from now. Um, look at all of look at the procession of planets that are in Aries: Neptune, Mercury, Mars, Saturn, Chiron's there. The sun is still there, and actually, just a few hours earlier, the moon is in a new moon aspect on the, I believe it's the 17th of April. Um, so Aries is just being lit up by all of the component parts of the macrocosm. And it's like I liken it as Saturn's holding court. You know, Saturn has assembled the Knights of the Round Table. Choose your metaphor, right? The assembly is present with the god of war. Mars is there, and there is a discussion being had, and we can see that, right? And so it's important to note that, as I just mentioned, Saturn going into Aries is relevant. Neptune going into Aries is relevant. The new moon in Aries is relevant. Mars is the ruler of Aries, is literally is it today, yesterday, tomorrow?
Hmm.
Just moved into Aries. So we are at the beginning of the next chapter, the next phase. If we would have been having this conversation a couple of months ago, I would have been talking about how we are at the end of the previous phase. This is a big time for us, and it's fitting, right? Because you articulated quite well. Aries initiates. We are all being initiated into the next phase. And I would beg this thought is look, we need to initiate ourselves from our own heart centers, you know, from our own internal GPS, and not somebody else's shenanigans.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. And also, to point out another cartoonish connection to the world stage, Aries, Mars is in Aries. All those signs are in Aries, and the conflict is with Iran, which means the land of the Aryans. So, I mean, how more cartoonish can you be? This even of course in language, subconsciously it tries to stir up the attention away from what would be otherwise an internal situation to an external performance. But anyway, let's move on then to Taurus, the bull. Taurus is, I think, usually associated with the raw nature, correct? So on the one hand, animalistic, but on the other hand, the abundance of the natural world, be it abundance in terms of life, but also abundance in terms of everything, even death, right? A lot of things also have to end for life to grow, and all life grows on the death of something else. But it is also being a Venusian sign. It is also associated with a certain aesthetic sense that is certainly, and correct me if I'm wrong, more uh, raw. That aesthetic sense is more raw than, for example, in Libra, which is another sign that is ruled by Venus. Would you agree with that? I don't know if I, introduced Taurus correctly here or not, but correct me.
Yeah, let's talk about Taurus. I think you did a fair shake at it, brother. I love Taurus. So Taurus is
So do I. So do I.
yeah.
My wife is all Taurus, man.
Right, right. Exactly. It's Taurus is what we call fixed feminine. Fixed feminine earth, right? And so yes, indeed, there is a natural or earthy flavor, feeling, or component to Taurus. Fixed in its higher octave can mean reliable and loyal and steady as she goes. Fixed also in its lower octave can be a bit stubborn, right? And unmovable, like the bull, right? And so let us not think of the raging bull when we're thinking about Taurus. Let's think about that beautiful cow out in the pasture, lumbering around, feeding, just I spent some time in Europe last summer and took walks every day. And there was these rolling farmlands with all of these beautiful animals and cows and very regal. Um,
Hmm.
you could tell, you could see the difference between the bulls and the cows and this. And so there's, yes, as you pointed out, the goddess that rules Taurus is Venus. And so there's a very Venusian quality to Taurus. Taurus, people with strong Taurus placements, they tend to go for comfort. It doesn't have to be luxury, but it could. It could be luxurious. It could be comfortable. There's a symmetry to the Venus flavor of Taurus, a beauty, sensuality, sexuality, relationship. Um, the the earth quality, of course, and many of the things I just mentioned tend to be material. They tend to be earthy, of this particular realm. We can see them, we can feel them, we can touch them, this type of thing. And so, uh, yes, Taurus suns and Taurus uh, ascendants, rising signs, they're reliable. They can get into a groove and you can count on that groove. And generally it's a beautiful groove. And so yeah, what more can be said about Taurus? Any questions or any other things come to mind?
Well, do you agree that its aesthetic sense, so its Venusian side, and even its enjoyment, because Venus is also the enjoyment of life, is more raw than Libra, for example. And you are a Libra, you can attest to that. So, would that be correct to say?
So I would say that the it's more sensorial. It would be more associated again as we look at the entirety of one's chart. There could be other influence, but Taurus would be more the body. It would be more, uh, whereas Libra, being an air sign, is more mental, actually. So
Right.
there's a
Mhm.
beauty of the mental process. Like for example, the Libra. Okay, so my wife has a moon in Taurus, right? My oldest daughter, moon in Taurus. Uh, the Libras are the that Venusian quality of the Libra really appreciates the aesthetic beauty, the sensual material beauty of Taurus. I love
Yes.
Taurus. Man, I love Taurus. I think you do too. I think we come by it honestly, don't we? We're a good example of
Yes.
that.
Yes, and you also, in tandem with that, another, because I've also tried to remove some misconceptions with Aries. There is a misconception with Taurus, and more specifically to when it's talked about in terms of the second house, which is that the second house in Taurus is associated with money. And this is a misconception, in my opinion, because money is a concept. Money does not exist in the natural world. Possessions do exist, but even the possessions rely upon an agreement that emerges organically. Okay, this pasture is yours because if another animal steps there, the owner of that pasture will kick you out, right? But it must be understood here that usually there's a translation onto the worldview that whether we like it or not, we all share because we were indoctrinated into it, of Taurus and the second house being associated with material possessions in the sense of money, having a lot of money or having, and this is not, in my opinion, necessarily the case. It has to do with possessions, yes, with the body, yes, with the natural physicality, yes, but it's usually cartoonishly translated into money because, of course, money is part of economy, and economy is a rigged game that is completely played out. And so, if you are sticking, let's say, Taurus and your second house merely to the economic game, you will be completely distracted away from, what it means inside of you, what your physical values are, right? I don't know if this makes sense to you, but if you have any comment.
Yeah, well, uh, it's that's often the mistake that is made. That Taurus is too rigidly associated with the second house. Um, and for all the other reasons that you just mentioned. But yeah, no, like so for example, some Taurus strong Taurus placements fancy themselves as simple. They might say them simple. And
Hmm.
and for example, they they don't need lots of money, they don't need lots of things. Um the
Hmm.
Tauruses generally though that's the little things, right? It's like a traveler, for example, who has strong Taurian placements. They don't have laps of luxury and cars and monies and all these types of things, but they have a beautiful backpack and they have selected a half a dozen really beautiful pieces of clothing, have practical pieces of clothing, for example, and maybe they have um, some a mala or a very special book or a journal, and so they're gonna place a great deal of value on things of real meaning to them. But certainly, I think they get a bad rap sometimes, and as being kind of overdone or something like this. And yeah, no, I think that's unfair. That's not the case with the Taurians that I know.
Yeah, absolutely. Me neither. And I think you've touched upon a beautiful point there, which is the simplicity. And simplicity here in the elevated sense, because a Taurus it is as long as it has the simple beauty of even the natural world, it will be absolutely at home. Like sitting down there and it's fine, right? Nothing's happening, no problem, right? Doesn't require, statuettes or that would be probably more Libran, right? Statuettes and a great painting and this and that. That is not necessary. Good food, good comfort, like you said, but not associated as closely as it usually is with the economic gain. Now, um, since we also are giving examples of that, in my chart over there, we see the only planet in Taurus, a planet, well, it's not a planet, but the only luminary or whatever it is in Taurus is Chiron. Would you care to, if, okay, imagine you're doing a reading now. What would you say to me about that Chiron in Taurus?
Yeah, you got it. So the Chiron's the wounded healer is the little phrase that's associated with Chiron. That's where our wound resides. And of course, we'd have to dive deeper into the eighth house characteristics. And the eighth house is depth of a relationship, the karmic, often karmic relationships. The eighth house is associated loosely with Scorpio. There's an intensity, there's death and rebirth, other people's resources, inheritance. Um, the eighth house, a lot of times people quake when there's transits or aspects to their eighth house because sometimes unwanted things emerge in their sphere of influence or their in their presence and kind of can have some rug pulls, can have some spiritual death and rebirth, could be physical death of a loved one, for example. But so I should also say taboo. Maybe tantra could be the depth of the relationship, so that it often has to do with sexual relations between partners and this type of thing. So, whereas the seventh house is the house of marriage and the other and partnerships and whatnot. The eighth house is kind of what happens to a couple when, after they say I do or agree to be in a relationship, and then they go to bed together, and then they share resources together, and then they buy houses together and this type of thing. And so Chiron in the eighth, that suggests that you have a wound associated with the themes that I just discussed, uh, because there is a Venusian Taurian flavor to that. It could be with a previous relationship. It could be, again, topical to the topics that I just mentioned. I have Chiron in the eighth, and so does my love, actually has Chiron in the eighth, and we associate those very clearly now. We study these things, right? And both of us
Hmm.
are practice and share our understandings of Tantra with those who are interested, and so therefore we have overcome some things associated with that, and things that emerged in our previous relationships or earlier in our life. And now what happens is when we overcome or go through or come out the other side of our wound, oftentimes we can either directly or indirectly, we can guide and direct others to do the same.
Yes.
Making sense?
Yes, yes. And I was smiling here because even without necessarily, or let's say even before necessarily overcoming the wound, I think that one of the aspects that I note about Chiron in Taurus in the eighth house of all the houses, it's exactly the supposed opposite of it, right? Because of the Libra ascendant necessarily. What it does is it also gives me a quick, very quick, a very usually accurate insight into other people's wounds. It is very easy to, let's say, flavor, if you like, energetically, or whatever you want to call it, the wounds in the other as well. And that comes, I think, from the eighth house, because the eighth house is exactly the investigation, right? The uncovering of the hidden, buried truth, the skeletons in the closet, right? And with Chiron there, which of course it means my wound, but here in a projected sense, because it's not retrograde, in an outward sense, it is also a very good sensor, let's say, for the wounds of others. It can easily dig into the energy of another and find the wound there. And that's something that I've realized that comes naturally to me.
Well, just so that we're clear for those that are thinking about taking this astrology thing to the next level or with a little bit more seriousness, you we've established in these first three recordings or videos, your intuitive nature. Uh,
Mhm.
and really, Armin, having known you for a while now, your intuitive, your intuition is applicable to most areas of life. And so in other words, I wouldn't necessarily identify your intuition, in other words, your ability to identify the wounds of others simply by
Mhm.
looking at your eighth house, but by looking at the entirety of your chart, by looking at your water placements and some of your other placements that we've spoke to, and we'll get into it in more details as we continue on. I know you to be quite intuitive, and so yes, indeed, perhaps as you have learned to recognize, and you mentioned a couple examples of this in our previous videos, as you learn to recognize your own wounds, right?
Hmm.
And then, okay, and you get some affirmative feedback as they run their course, and you can see them clearly and you can overcome them. Yes, indeed. Just given your nature, some of your other placements, you indeed can identify those in others, no doubt.
Right.
Um,
Okay.
all right. So,
All right.
yeah, shall we
So
move
now to
on?
Gemini. Yeah.
Yeah.
Gemini. And we have an empty field there in my Gemini, but let's talk about Gemini first. Usually associated with Mercury. It's one of the two signs that Mercury rules, correct? And usually it is, again, cartoonishly depicted as having two faces. And let's say it's two in one, right? So that is because, of course, it's represented by the twins. But Pisces also has twin fishes, right? So it's, I mean, I like to bring um, these cartoonish depictions within the world stage exactly to demystify them because we're here to, talk about the internal astrology, the clock face that shows your inner timings, not the timings that you were told or given to pay attention to. And yeah, the Gemini does not necessarily have two faces, is not necessarily superficial, as is also one of the things told about Gemini. I mean, anyone can be superficial. I've met superficial Pisces, if you can believe that, Pisces suns. So it's a cartoon that has to be demystified. So let's get to the core of what Gemini means. Of course, being mercurial, it will of course be related to the intellect. And what are the values usually associated with the third house, if you can.
Yeah. Yeah, again, even though Gemini, yes, is generally associated with third house and it shares some of those characteristics, it's let us be wary not to too strictly associate Gemini with the third house. But yes, indeed, Mercury rules Gemini. Yes,
Mhm. Mhm.
also Virgo. What we need to, with regards to the the two-faced or the twins, or this idea that you're going to get one person on one day and you're going to get another person on another day. Um, Really, what we're speaking to is the mutability of Gemini, the mutability of Virgo. So there's fixed signs, there's cardinal signs, and there's mutable signs. And let's just think of mutable as flexible. It's like when we take on, for those of us that are operating at a higher octave, for those of us who aren't in deep in the shadow, and we're constantly changing our persona based on the people in the room, and manipulating people and this type of thing. Well, we take on new information, whether that be through a conversation, or a deep study, or casual study. We're going to, if we're mutable in nature, we're going to be able to change our worldview, to change our philosophy. We're going to be open to, as we extract new information, we're going to put it into the calculus, and we're going to emerge out with a new value, right? A new understanding. The ninth house is one's philosophy, one's cosmology, one's theology, one's higher mind. It's the house of the Jupiter and the master, the guru. And so with Gemini there, this suggests, and again, I know a little bit of your story, so I can draw on this. It suggests that you for you have held on to beliefs when your 20s or your 30s, for example, that have
Mhm.
changed over time,
Yeah.
given the mutability of the mercurial Gemini. Um, Again, because you have Libra as your ascendant, which is directly across from Aries. And so you have kind of this paradox in each of your houses, Armin. So, as you pointed out already, Gemini is generally associated with the third house. Gemini is generally associated with the type of mind, the practical mind, the mind that needs to know a little bit about a lot of things to navigate one's environment, to navigate the terrain in the immediacy of the environment, for example, which is generally associated with third house themes, right? So you
Hmm.
have that Gemini mutable quality in the ninth house, which is, as I've mentioned a moment ago, more along the mastery, the higher mind, or diving deep in a few subjects as opposed to um, the opposite, which we just said. And so ultimately, I think you balanced that quite well, right? And so, but unfortunately for you, because you have zero planets in this house, you're just mentally not there at all. Gotcha.
Quite the opposite. No, quite the opposite. Because
Yeah.
that was one of the things that I was going to mention right after you presented that was that the fact that it's open does not mean that it's an absence. Quite the contrary. It means that it's not defined. And being not defined gives you a freedom there that otherwise you wouldn't have. Like, for example, we spoke about Chiron in Taurus, right? That is something that is there, and there is no free will to fill it up with anything, let's say. Yes, you can work with it, but you have to work with it. It doesn't go away, right? Having an open house like that means that it's up to you then to know which goes in there. And of course, if the open house there is the ninth, the philosophy is my free will, is I fill it up with what I discover, and not necessarily being, let's say, led by any definition that would otherwise, define it in a more structural sense, right?
Oh, I think that's quite astute. Yeah, there will be uh, some freedoms there. What's also going to happen is we're going to place more emphasis on the ruling planet. So in this case, this is Mercury. And so we're going to
Hmm.
go find Mercury, and we already know where Mercury is because we were talking about Mercury a few minutes ago. It's in your seventh house. And so what this suggests is that you are going to find it useful. One means by which you are going to formulate your philosophy, your cosmology, your um, theology, and these types of things is going to be through the lens of the other, or the
Hmm.
mirror of the other. For example, um, with your wife. In fact, what we're
Hmm.
doing right now,
Yeah.
the episodes that you do with Silas, these
Hmm.
partnerships are means by which you formulate your higher mind and your understandings of the way things work.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And it is also it works both ways because it's at the same time very receptive, but also very giving, in that sense. So it's an open house. You can fill it up, and from there, take and give anything because it will never be exhausted in the sense, right? If there was definition there, there would be a point where, okay, no more, right? There's a limit to things. But here, there's no limit, right? And I see it as an advantage. And I'm not talking about my particular chart. I'm saying anyone that has an open house somewhere will have far more a liberty, let's say, far more leeway in that particular circle or that particular segment of the circle than otherwise.
Yeah, I think that's fair. That's fair. We can, when we have more placements, points and placements, planets in a particular area, there's going to be more emphasis on that, and there's going to be more direct action.
Yeah.
And yeah. So no, I think we could keep it at that. That's well said. And unless you have anything else to add, shall we press on?
So would it be correct to say that the Gemini would then be, in the organic sense, the one that first establishes contact, right? In the sense, okay, if we're talking about a journey, there's the Aries takes the first step, Taurus settles in, right? Oh, okay, this nice field that Aries stepped in, now I settle. And Gemini starts making contact with the neighbors. Let's see who curiosity, let's see who is in on the trees. Let's see who is in the field right next to it. That kind of thing. That is also an aspect, because we're looking at this from an organic point of view. That is also an aspect that reflects Gemini.
Yeah, yeah, yes. And again, it's loosely associated with the third house. Those are third house themes. Going out and exploring the direct environment. Um, the third house, for what it's worth, has to do with our siblings, and so that's usually themes of our formative years. Um, Gemini is, as we mentioned before, it's mutable. It's mutable air, and air is
Hmm.
associated with the mind. It's associated with thought and communication, this type of thing. Um, yes, it tends to be uh, again, it tends to be more associated with that less practical, necessary um, information, understandings in order to navigate life, like in a very
Right.
practical
Right.
sense. Yeah, yeah. Whereas some of our mental processes are more geared towards uh, indulging on the steps of the on the pantheon, or the
Hmm.
like learning things after we've practically dealt with chopping wood and carrying water, and well, okay, we got food for the evening, then we're gonna go bust open um the big book, that type of thing.
Yeah. 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 Very well. Okay. So next up in the wheel is Cancer. It has a bad name, just, for its name. It's the name of a famous supposed disease, which, according to German New Medicine, isn't a disease at all. But I'll not go there right now. But cancer is associated with the crab as well. And sometimes it is said that it walks sideways. It's never a direct manifesting energy. It also has soonish association with hyper emotionality, which again, it can happen, but it's not a defining characteristic at all. And it is basically of course, it's regulated by the moon, and so necessarily feminine, just by that fact, although the Germans do see the moon as masculine, interestingly. And it is indeed the builder of the home, not of the house, but of the home, right? It's the one that makes sure that the family and that tribe that surrounds the individual is made comfortable in all respects, not just food and shelter and so on, but comfortable in all respects. And so it is very, um, let's say, receptive to the emotions of others, which often is perhaps mistaken as their own emotional turmoil. Perhaps it's not necessarily the case, but I will let the master speak. Go ahead, Noble.
Yeah, Aries, I am. Taurus, I have. Gemini, I think, right? And Cancer, is like I hold, I love, I nurture.
Mm,
Cancer, as you rightly pointed out, is ruled by the moon. We're talking about the mother energy here. Um, Now it's I'm sure that have been hanging out and hanging in with us on this far through this series have started to recognize the importance of the elements and our understanding of the elements and the nature of the elements really help us understand the characteristics of a sign, for example, or the planet that
mm,
rules the sign. Um, right. So Aries, cardinal fire, right? The Taurus is earth. The Gemini is air. And then the Cancer, feminine water, right? Super, and it's cardinal, by the way. So the mother operates, instinctually, right? Like the animal within the feminine and the mother is going to operate instinctually. The mother that's done a little bit of work, and the awake mother, the mother that is can also tap into the intuition that we were speaking about earlier, right?
right.
Which
Hmm.
is really, I've found in my investigation of many people's charts these days, is the water is really helps us understand, those of us who have cultivated a strong internal compass or intuition. And so, yes, the I think you did a good job of summarizing Cancer. It's and distinguishing, for example, between the house and the home. Um, you know, the masculine among us is going to build a house. The feminine among us, and that could be within us too, but among us can
Hmm.
make it into a home which is designed to shelter and to comfort and to feed and to nurture and this type of thing. And so, uh, cardinal, I wanted to mention that the mother doesn't need, she doesn't have the time um, to go and consult with the tribe on dealing with your screaming baby. So cancers are cardinal. They take action in the same way that an Aries does. The Aries doesn't need to consult the tribal council either. They just take action. So does the mother. So does cancers. They feel into it. They have this instinctual quality, but then they feel into it. They feel into their intuition, and they do this quickly, mostly, and they take action, right? To nurture, to take care of, to shield the mama bear, shielding the baby bear from the lion, this type of thing.
Hmm. Oh yeah, never. One of the things that is evident with the Cancer energy is never be in between a Cancer and his home or her home, um, uh, home, family, etc. Because that is, what really, there's a sea monster that emerges from that beach, little crab, when that is done. And it is, of course, a very protective sign. It takes action, like you said, and it's very good that you pointed that out. Very able to, um, do their own a thing, always with this perspective of, the tribe or the family or the home that is the environment. But home here again, we're not talking about luxury or that kind of thing, the home that you see in the magazines or whatever, or in those shows on TV. But the home, it can be a hut, right? But it's nonetheless made into a home, right? It's not the place itself, it's not the flashiness of it. It is the value, the emotional value that can be extracted, the comfort that can be extracted from that location, right? Would that be correct?
Yeah, and let us just yes, absolutely. But let us be reminded that when we are speaking of Venusian themes, um, or these more feminine themes, and not to be um, confused with female, just feminine, right? Is
Hmm.
it's a matter of active in some respects, right? And so but like the Taurus, we were talking earlier about the Taurus. Yeah, Taurus is totally it can be very materialistic, right? If they're not centered, grounded, balanced, and they can be very indulgent. The Venusian energy can be very indulgent, and the mother could like nesting. The concept of nesting. I don't. I have a couple
Hmm.
of children, so as they were about ready to emerge from mama's womb, we went through a nesting process as a result of Mama Bear, right? It
Hmm.
was, and of course, it was beautiful and it was very instinctual, and we were preparing the house for their emergence. Well, I think that, like anything else, can be overdone. So we just need to be understand that but let us not fall prey to the caricature or the unbalanced characteristics of these signs and these planets. I think it's more fair to say that in balance, yeah, absolutely. The home doesn't need to be opulent. It just needs to be functional, and it needs to serve the purpose of caring for the flock.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely agree. And so now, likewise, imagine that you're doing a reading right now and you see Jupiter there, retrograde in the 10th house in Cancer, and also the midheaven close by. What would your, indications be from that?
Okay. So, boy, anytime that Cancer's in the 10th, um, you know, this obviously doesn't apply to you. But if it's a female, happens to be of a female parts, are they a full-time mom? Literally, um, are they a kindergarten teacher, right? Are they in the medical community or some kind of psychology or sociology? Are they a healer? Um, and of course, healers can be at all different levels, right? It can be, are they a physical healer? Are they a mental healer? Are they an emotional healer? Are they a spiritual healer? Um, so the 10th house is how we are perceived, how we allow ourselves to be perceived in some cases, um, to be received by the public. It's often associated with one's career, um, uh, levels of expertise, MD after our name, this type of thing. The career is in this day and age, and at least in the Western world, is generally what we would associate with the 10th house. Although, again, in the case of a full-time mom, well, this could be the community knows, Mrs. Jones as the one that's carting 10 kids to school every day, and this type of thing. And so this suggests is that you're going to bring the qualities of Cancer, the nurturing, kind, caring, motherly type of qualities. Um, that is going to be how you're, at least in part, how you're received by the public, how the larger, whereas the fourth house is what you keep private and is inside. The 10th house would be more how people might say, hey, do you know who Armin is? Oh yeah, Armin, he's the guy that XYZ, right? Um,
Yeah.
and
Mhm.
so in addition to that, you have so the MC, the midheaven, is a point. It's opposite of what we call the IC. The midheaven is, again, it's a calculated point that is also associated with our public facing ness, right?
Mm.
The MC is generally in the ninth or the 10th house. Occasionally, it's in the 11th. Sometimes it's in the eighth, but most times it's in the 10th or the ninth. And then you have, and so this is just because it is, we haven't talked about the bounds yet. And I think that's probably outside the scope of this particular series. But the bounds are these, let me grab you a little circle. You see these little
Hmm.
symbols here in this
Yeah, I was
circle.
wondering about those. Yeah.
Yeah, those are called bounds, and that's a different level of investigation that we can an additional tool that we can use in order to give deeper into a specific house theme. For example, I wanted to point this out actually earlier when we were gosh, where we were at. I think we were talking about Taurus and we were talking about Chiron and
Mm.
Chiron being in the bound of Venus because and that has a signification. But at any rate, as you pointed out, you have Jupiter in the midheaven. And so the midheaven again is akin to 10th house themes anyway. Jupiter expands, right? Jupiter is the great benefic and it tends to expand. And so what this suggests, oh, by the way, Jupiter is retrograde, which a lot of your placements are retrograde, as we spoke to in previous
Yeah.
episodes, which again tends to be uh, introspective, internalized, thoughtful. So in Jupiter's case, um, there the might be a little bit more um, care with regards to expansiveness. If you think
Hmm.
about it, expansion can get us into trouble if we have tendencies towards indulgence of whatever kind. And Jupiter comes around, we can become very indulgent and we can become addictive, right? And so that's one of the
Right.
downsides or the shadow of Jupiter is if we really like to eat, we could become really overweight. Or if we're really a big
Right.
like to drink, we could become an alcoholic, this type of thing. And so anyway, what you have going here with Cancer in the 10th with Jupiter in retrograde suggests um, that you really care and that you're likely to express yourself in a way that care is understood by those either directly in your care or those in your sphere. Um, and I think that you come by that honestly, frankly. I think that when you're communicating in a podcast or back and forth in a voice chat or these types of things, or just mano a mano or face to face, I think you genuinely bring forth that motherly, kind, caring quality, um, and that is more needed in this day and age, frankly. Um,
Yeah, well, I agree with that. And it is something that I've noticed that appears naturally in the sense of, other people, even without knowing me to the depth that perhaps or the people that are closest, they recognize that there is a harbor, let's say, that, yeah, this guy I can talk to. And even complete strangers, it wasn't uncommon that when I was among the crowds, that a complete stranger would start talking to me about their lives, and sometimes it wasn't really the moment, and I was like, why is this person telling me this, right? And the reason is because perhaps there is this compatibility, right? This match of uh, perceiving that I would be open to at least, say something that would assist in that particular case that was being presented, right? Whatever it was, from the mundane to the deeper. So I understand what you mean, and of course, it's a good example to show how um, this works because Jupiter is usually extremely masculine, right? The one that expands, that goes and explores even beyond all boundaries. I think Jupiter and Saturn are natural. Although one is the son of the other in the mythology, they are natural opponents in the cartoonish pantheon. For that reason, because one tries to go all beyond the boundaries and expand, and the other one wants to limit, right? So Jupiter is very masculine, but it's in a placement there that is extremely receptive and very, very feminine, right? But then it's in the 10th house, which is also feminine, but the 10th house is very Saturnian. So that's why I brought Saturn into the picture here, because there's a certain dichotomy there, right? That I also feel sometimes of the, balancing out the expansion that Jupiter would try to, and even the midheaven, like the visibility, with the 10th house that, wants things structured in a certain way, in a very sometimes predictable way, which is not something that I am, entirely aligned with, because I think that predictability, after a certain point, and this could be explained by perhaps the presence of Jupiter there, but the predictability after a certain point becomes robotic, right? And we are living organisms, living beings with life beyond the biology. And so we need to not allow the limitations, let's say the predictability, to dictate the entirety of our existence. Sorry for the rant.
No, no. Let me jump in before we move over to Leo, though, because
Hmm.
I want to add some flavor to a couple of things that you mentioned, just to give clarity, and maybe this will give you some deeper levels of awareness. With
Hmm.
regards to Jupiter being very fiery, there's in part that's true. It's the ruler of Sagittarius. Sagittarius is fire. Sagittarius is again, loosely associated with the ninth house. The ninth house is associated with travel, right? And all these higher mind themes that we were talking about earlier. But Jupiter is also the ruler of Pisces. And
Hmm.
that's really important to understand, because Pisces is about its other, is water, and it's feminine. And it's a much different quality of Jupiter than, of course, the Jupiter that represents Sagittarius. So, um, all there's these. I think sometimes we tend to gravitate to one of these qualities or another, and it's important to look at them both. And so, I would just again, having done this for a bit, I would not discount the 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 feminine quality that, remember, we were talking about your intuition,
Right.
and that being associated with a water. And if we're looking at the 10th house, and we're looking at the blue colors here, and the blue colors in your 10th house, in your second house, and in your sixth house, um, those, that's water. And look at all of the important placements that you have. Your sun is in the sixth house. The south node in Mars is also in the sixth house. Jupiter rules your sixth house. Um, so so anyway, you have the ruler of Pisces, right? Which is Jupiter, is in a water sign in your 10th house. And so that's going to sharpen that intuitive quality that we've been talking about. Maybe sharpen's not the best word, expand. It's going to expand that quality. And so, um, there's so anyway, be mindful of that, and just think about what
Hmm.
happens when we bring fire to water. Okay, so we can boil water, and we
Yeah.
can cook with it, and we can disinfect. and we can do some wonderful things. Well, when we bring fire to water to boiling, you know, okay, that can burn, that can evaporate. And so Jupiter's a fascinating one. There's no doubt about it. The other thing that I wanted to point out to you is this association with um, Saturn in the 10th house. And this is a big distinction I think that we need to pause and make here. The difference
Mhm.
between the modern astrological approach or contemporary astrological approach and a more older or ancient traditional approach. Yes, it's true that the 10th house is loosely associated with Capricornian themes. And I mean, I could speak to those for a long time, actually. And there's many similarities between the 10th house and these Capricornian things. And of course, Saturn rules Capricorn. And so therefore we would say to ourselves, well, the 10th house then must have Saturnian quality to it. Well, the Hellenistic astrologer wouldn't put so much emphasis on that. They wouldn't necessarily um, identify the native um, having like these watery Cancerian, Jupiterian, and then add the Saturnian flavor to it. Um, so I just wanted to clear that up. And now that's a different an interpretation, and not everybody would agree with me, um, but I wanted to bring that to your attention. Excuse me.
No, and I think it's a great point. And of course, you're mentioning that fact because it also rules in the traditional, it also rules the 11th house, or it also rules Aquarius, right? So that is a good point and well taken here. Of course, even though the Capricorn and Aquarius are both ruled by Saturn, they are very different Saturns in the same way that they are very different Jupiters, the ones in Sagittarius and in Pisces. So, point well taken. Point well taken.
Yeah, amen to that. What do you think? We got time to press on?
We can do one more, perhaps. Leo, another open field in my chart. But let's talk about the themes of Leo. Of course, Leo usually associated cartoonishly with exorbitant pride, almost to a narcissistic depiction, which I think it's a complete misperception. It is an energy that, being fiery, of course, it can manifest in a very invasive manner to the other. But all of these, let's say, signs, all of these energies have a lower side to them, or something when something is out of balance. They need to they manifest in an unpleasant way. Leo is the regality of the action, the nobility of the action. And when I say nobility here is more in the sense of your chosen username, noble intent, not in the sense of, lineage of interbred people. It has to do with an action that is far more thoughtful, perhaps, than the Aryan, and that takes into account a different level of consequence than an Aryan would. For example, if we compare the two fires, right? So an Aryan would take action because he feels it's right and would initiate that action. A Leo would temper that secondary action with, for example, let's say a moral code or a noble intent, like as your username, or something of that sort. That is what it's there to do, in my opinion. But I will let again the master speak because I am just an apprentice here.
A fine one at that, brother. You nailed it, really. Yeah, Leos can get a bad rap. So Leo the lion, Leo the lioness, right? Ruled by the sun. And so, yes, indeed, there is a regalness. There's the boy, we could just go in so many directions on this one. But the sun, the Christ consciousness, the heart, the cross, the vertical and the horizontal meeting at the intersection point in the heart of a human. Um, the balanced, centered, and grounded Leo. Now, when I say Leo, that could be a Leo ascendant or that could be a Leo sun, for example, walks
Mhm.
into the room and they change it. Um, that doesn't necessarily mean bad or good. It's just the presence of a Leo tends to change the room. Their very presence. Oftentimes, the Leo will bring expression with their presence, right? They'll bring fire. They'll bring fire, and so as you rightly pointed out, they're well, when it's not balanced, when it's not centered and grounded, um, when it's operating from the lower octave or the shadow, the Leo can be very arrogant, wanting to be the center of attention, or will do certain actions that are designed to capture the attention of the people in the room. But we've all been around Leo suns or Leo ascendants or people with strong Leo placements, man, that are just fun to be with, man. That fire is
Mhm.
intoxicating. They can really radiate and warm the room. My sister and my grandmother both Leo suns, and just they're intoxicating. They just come in and they just fill the room with the light of the sun, basically. And
Mhm.
so, yeah, there is, when we start talking about mundane astrology, when we start looking at the world, oftentimes when there is the changing of a guard on the world stage, when leaders fall prey to
Right.
their own tendencies or the other ways in which these crazy lunatic politician and leaders, in quotes, can fall, Leo tends to be involved, or the sun tends to be involved. And so, um, yeah, fire. So the Leo is obviously is a fire sign, and so it's a masculine sign, and it's a fixed, so fixed fire, uh, and that is it makes sense, right? We talked about the Aries being cardinal and initiatory, and the spark taking action, and Leos are generally loosely associated with the fifth house, right? And the fifth house,
Mhm.
we've been around the block for a while. We were adolescents in our expression when we came out the womb and in our formidable years, and we were um, trying to find ourselves. And by the time we get to the fifth house, we are expressing ourselves more fully. We are more, we can be more authentic, true to who we are, in quotes again. So there's a fixedness about the Leo energies and characteristics.
Yes, and it's related so that you address that point. It's related to a nobility of that fire of that action, right? So it's concerned to imbue the action, not just for the action's sake, but with a consequence that it elevates or tries to at least attempt to elevate the result. Because that is something that, for example, an Aryan wouldn't be preoccupied with. He would, okay, this is the right thing to do. I have to do it. Oh, but think of the consequences. No, I don't think of the consequences. I do, right? The Leo is that secondary fire, that second degree of fire that, although he didn't initiate, okay, in the world stage, we would see the king. Yeah, but the king didn't make the throne. He didn't make the kingdom. He inherited it, right? he stepped in. Okay, and when he steps in, what is he going to do with that rod and with that scepter and, with that crown, let's say? And we're talking world stage, which is just for people to contextualize, but it would be the same at a psychological level, right? So when the Leo steps in, he inherits the action that was taken by Aries, then of course the settlement that was done by Taurus, then the expansion, the expansion of communication and interaction that was done by Gemini, and the building of the home that was done by Cancer. And when he steps in to take action again, it's already an action that is concerned with the result, right? Am I correct?
Yes. Yes,
Mhm.
yes, indeed. And the one thing to point out as well is the uh, when we start looking at, well, this is a deeply esoteric tool, but when we look through the esoteric lens or the spiritual lens, let's call it, the Leo and its ruler, the sun, is usually associated with consciousness, conscious awareness. To your point about um, taking regal action or taking noble action, yeah, it's again, it's for those of us who are navigating the spiritual path and whatnot, and often we speak about the importance of bringing conscious awareness to all aspects of our being, and the Leo and the Sun would help us point to that in our chart, in our natal chart. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And so, again, you are making a reading and you see Leo there in the 11th house, empty. So another open house. What would you extract? Let's say, what information would you extract? I know it's holistic, but let's just for the sake of the viewers, focus on that particular open house in Leo in the 11th. What would you extract from that?
Yeah, so in the absence of other placements, I would go to the Lord or the ruler, or the god or goddess.
Praise the Lord.
Praise the Lord. That would be Lord would be a more of a Vedic kind of a Jyotish expression,
Uh,
but yeah, it's let's go with God in this case, and so we or planet. We'd look for the planet that rules Leo, and that would really give us help us understand what Leo in your 11th house means for you. And so, of course, as we track over and we're reminded that your sun is in the 6th house and it's next to uh, your south node and Mars there in Pisces. And so this is going to bring, so first of all, what is the 11th house? The 11th house is, it's our, let's call it our friends, our network, um, not our family per se, although we might call our friends family. But it's not our blood family or the family, the step family, this type of thing. It's not necessarily the other, although the other can emerge from this area of our chart. It tends to be kind of it's not our siblings and it's not our distant relatives. It tends to be everybody else, you know. It could be the Discord servers, or it could be your net your those who you call friends. It could be the people who watch the podcast, your podcast, this type of thing. It could be
mhm,
your benefactors. The 11th house is generally considered a very good good, not bad house. Um, hopes and
mm,
dreams, this types of things. Um, generally a good house, and so you're having Leo or fire. Um, you know, so that is tends to suggest that there's a leadership quality that you bring um, into. I'm going to use the word tribe for now. That you kind of bring into your tribe or your group, your friendship group, this type of thing. There'd be people would
mm,
view you as a leader. Now, as I look at where your sun is in the 6th house, and again, the 6th house is your health, your day to day, which is really the meat of the 6th house. Is how do you organize your day? What do you do during your day? to keep yourself healthy so that you can serve, right? And so the
Mm.
sun, the fire actually, just like Mars, right? So the sun, fire is in this water. It's so there's a there's this what's coming up for me is just the boiling of water. It's just like, maybe we're not going full steam here, but we're rapid boil. And so at any rate, there's the again, knowing you, I can make the leap here that there's a certain group of people that you um, spend your time with. Um, Oftentimes you do that throughout your day. It's a part of your daily routine, spending time with those who you would call friends and colleagues and your tribe, right?
Hmm.
Making
Hmm.
sense?
Yes, and with all that boiling water, I should have been a cook, right?
Maybe, maybe.
Okay, and so tell us a bit. Okay, in the same way that I've already explained what an open house means to me, but what the fact that it would be absent in that particular 11th house of any aspects defined. Although in a reading that I had, there was one thing in Leo which was Lilith. I don't know what the importance is of Lilith for Hellenistic astrology or not. Maybe you can go a bit slightly into that, but let's assume that it's empty. And what is the significance of that particular house empty in Leo?
No friends, brothers. No. No. It's as you pointed out with our analysis of the ninth house. There's really, th- I think that there would be the way that I would look at this. There would be more emphasis simply on the sign. There would be more emphasis on the sign, the nature and the qualities and the characteristics of the sign and its ruler and the placement of its ruler, and then any aspects to Leo, which we will get into at another time. So for example, I'll just give you one quick example.
Hmm.
Mercury, which we spoke to before. You have Mercury in your seventh house, and we talked about how that relates to um, your communication with your partners. Well, because Mercury um, by sign is trine to your 11th house of your friends in your tribe, it can bring that same quality. In other words, you're a leader and you lead with words and communication and uh, basically you're a messenger of sorts. And that's obvious, right? Just anybody who knows your work with your contemplations that you share with others and the discord you have in Discord and these types of things. It's like there's uh you come by that honestly. So there I would just emphasize the dutifulness, the uh boy, we can start to weave a story here, even though we haven't gone deep into the houses. We can recognize your 10th house carrying nature. We can see the 11th house of having that regal or noble quality to it. We can see that emerges from your day to day, right? Um in Pisces, right? Which is
Hmm.
again takes us back to your 10th house because of the Jupiter connection there. And so we can start to weave together the story of you, and we can put that up against the smell test, right? I mean, it's like we know Armin, he's been on this earth for a while. Um, does he exhibit these leadership qualities in a group environment with his chosen tribe or whatnot? Um, does he communicate? Does he use mercurial characteristics within his being in order to do so? And does he do that on the regular? Or did he do that on the regular? And the answer to all of those, I think, is a resounding yes. So,
Right. Yes, well. it was the vocation that I eventually found, and the fact that it's empty again, touching upon the same thing that I mentioned with Gemini in the ninth. It gives the freedom of the 11th house themes to not be as defined or as, heavily defined into my psyche, and therefore I can not only give but receive there with very little um, definition. Let's say, it doesn't need to be this way or that way. It's a bit more free, right? It breathes better. let's let's put it like that. Any thoughts? I don't know if there's any thoughts that Hellenistics would have about Lilith, because in one of the readings I got Lilith there. I don't know if it has any bearing or not, or if it's a modern thing.
Yeah, I'm going to take a pass on that one because I don't have a
Okay,
lot of experience with Lilith. I know there's two. There's a calculated point, and then there's Black Moon Lilith. See, I'm not even clear enough to be answering that part of the question. So, yeah, do Hellenistic astrologers make use of Lilith? My sense is probably not. I know a lot of contemporary astrologers do. Afraid I'm
very
I'm
well,
not going to be of much use on that.
very well. It was just curiosity anyway. But well, it's a great point to wrap up this episode. So we stopped at Leo. Next up in the next episode, we'll go to Virgo, which is the ascendant of our good friend Noble here, right?
Indeed.
And it's that sign that is unbearably organized and neat. It has to have everything in the right drawer, otherwise it starts. No, I'm kidding. And
My mom would beg to differ.
but no, we'll go into Virgo, and there's a big one over there in my chart that we'll talk about next episode, which is Saturn, right?
Yes,
It's one of the biggies. And again, Rick, great pleasure to have you here for another episode of As Above, So Below. And I hope you enjoyed yourself too.
I sure did, man. It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure all mine. Enjoy this thoroughly. Looking forward to our next encounter, which probably be in the next week or two.
Very well. Very well. We'll arrange something. Excellent. So thank you all, and I hope to see you again in the next episode. Thank you.
Take care.